Now we will begin looking at style, form, and content. So when we look at a work of art, first thing is the style. What is the style that it's done in? Talked about, so far impressionists and post-impressionism, all some of the different cultures, the Greeks, Roman, Mayans, so that sort of, falls under, the styles and the form. What am I physically looking at in this case? And then content, what type of message am I being told? So looking at style, so a couple of different things to think about and look at with art and learning the language, essentially, how do we describe these pieces? So what we have is representational art. So basically, both the Dwayne Hanson and Louise Bourgeois, they are both representational. So the Dwayne Hanson, the house painter, the one on the right, is, very realistic. It's very natural, the trompe-l'oeil, full of the eye. Like when I talked about with the Ron Muke, all the crazy amount of details, same thing with the Dwayne Hanson. In fact, this particular piece, kind of a funny side story, when it was first shown in the museum for a big retrospect show, people thought that this was a museum worker who was, there getting the gallery or that particular room ready for the next show. And so people, were like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and just turned around and walked out, only to find out later that no, that's part of the actual show. So you can see in the background, he actually would paint part of the wall to go along with the piece, so to give it more of the realistic appearance. The Louise Bourgeois woman with packages technically is representational, but it's abstract. And typically abstract is when, much like the Alice Neal from the last lecture, where it's kind of this abstraction of the human form, same with the Mayan piece, still human forms, but it's abstracted to sort of fit their needs and fit the styles that they are working in. So again, this is, both representational, one being very naturalistic, while the other is an abstracted human form. Some other sort of use looking at African cultures, piece from the Yoruba and the piece from the Dogon. Again, the Yoruba piece is very naturalistic. There are certain stylizations to it, some stylized abstraction that, it fits their needs for image making, their way to represent the human form. And then on the right, the Dogon, highly abstracted human forms, kind of like the Louise Bourgeois, although these are probably a little bit easier to follow, identifying them as a human form, unlike the Louise Bourgeois. So again, certain periods, certain cultures, things like that, they will have their own styles. They'll have their own way of creating images. So often what we refer to as abstract art, again, abstract is an exaggeration of something. So the Yoruban and the Dogon, those are both abstracted human forms. Some of the times we use abstract to talk about non-representational or non-objective art, where there is no easy recognizable image. So the examples for that is the Wiles Kandinsky swinging and the Rebecca Purdom static on the right. So the Kandinsky, looking at his painting on the left, some people feel a little more comfortable with it because you kind of have something to work with. There's these different shapes and lines and colors. There's, different things going on, and you look at it and you start to recognize something, and you kind of create your own little story and all that of what you're looking at. Opposite the Purdom, her static painting, essentially, how do you make a painting about nothing? How do you not represent anything? So part of that would be, static. Kind of hard to describe today. Today, if you go to a channel or something like that on your television, you just get a blank screen or no signal, something like that. So back in the good old days of, my childhood of the 70s and 80s, where if you didn't have cable and you just had the aerial antenna, there were the channels that didn't have anything on it, and that's all you saw: static, dead air, nothingness. So that's sort of, Rebecca Purdom's sort of playfulness of how do you represent nothing. And so that is really, the idea behind non-representational, non-objective art, that there's no real recognizable objects. So, comparing the two, the Kandinsky, he's got kind of a lot going on there. A lot of people make up their own little image that they see, but, technically there's not an image that you should see by his standards. And then the Rebecca Purdom, where you're given absolutely nothing at all other than this white noise, the static. And so style. What style is it in? Like I said, we talked about different styles, different cultures. As I mentioned before, art being a product of the time. So all these different styles, when we get to the art history section, start putting everything in this chronological order, it makes a little bit of sense. But the styles is what's going on at the time. What are artists reacting against? What are they acting for? What are they going along with? What are they trying to do with the art? So the different cultures, different time periods, different movements, sometimes referred to as a school in some places. So all these, the different styles. So just quite a number that we'll look through here. So the Mayan, if we're to get some Olmecs and Toltec pieces, you would see these, visual differences that they have between them. So that, the Mayan style would be able to pick out from the other cultures in Mexico around the same time. Roy Lichtenstein with pop art, art becoming manufactured looking, art becoming very like mechanical looking. So Roy Lichtenstein, painting his to have that feel of mass production. Pop art is basically popular culture art. What is popular in the culture of the time? Or looked at the Andy Warhol, the Ethel Skull 36 time, he picked on a lot of famous people. Roy Lichtenstein, on the other hand, he went with, with the appearance of something that's been, commercially printed for his paintings. And then on the left, we have the Egyptians. I mean, that's kind of a given. We're all pretty familiar with Egyptian art, even though within the history of Egyptian art, there are certain subtle differences between the different major time periods. Then opposite that, Gothic piece, statue of Madonna. If you were to look at all the different Gothic movements going on through all of Europe, there would be differences between the English Gothic, French Gothic, German Gothic, Italian Gothic. Everyone kind of had their own little spin and take on it, and their way of making images. Toulouse-Lautrec, one of the post-impressionists, or sometimes neo-impressionists, depending on who you talk to. Again, it's by this time artwork's getting a little more arbitrary. Things are a lot looser, a lot more playful in a way. It's not so rigid and academic. They're basically reacting against that during their time, the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists. Barbara Hepworth, part of the New York school. Technically, that's supposed to be two people there, two figures, male and female. But some of the stuff during the New York school, all the different artists up in New York at the time, they're all sort of bringing this, different approach, different ideas. So if you were to look at some of the color-filled painters, Barnett Newman and Rothko, paring things down to the sort of simple form. The Barbara Hepworth would sort of fit in with that idea of paring things down to simple forms, kind of like the Louise Bourgeois, getting things very simple, basically. Grant Wood, the American Gothic painting, coming from the 30s. Kind of an interesting thing, when we get into art history and a lot of the ideas going on in art history, Grant Wood, during his time, as far as, the art world as a whole, was not really highly thought of. American art was not that thought of that well. Here recently, there's been a lot of looking back at American art from the first half of the 20th century, like Grant Wood and Hopper and Wyeth. Basically, it's like sort of the lighting and everything in this painting, it just screams Midwest America. So the other painters that I just mentioned, Hopper and Wyeth, it's like the appearance, the lighting, the colors, it's all just screams sort of America. You can only sort of get these type of people here with their their fashion and the architecture in the background. And so how do we tell styles apart from each other? Well, one way is to take a common theme, a common image, a common idea. So in this case, again, we're picking on Mona Lisa. So there on the left, we have the original Mona Lisa by Da Vinci during the High Renaissance, the time period that he was working in. Right, to the right, far right, is the Marcel Duchamp, where he's sort of making fun of and drawing a little mustache and a little goatee thing on Lady Lisa. And then simply down at the bottom, we can see LHOOQ. So what does LHOOQ have to do with anything? Well, if you're if you got real good knowledge of French, or you're from France, whatever the case may be, LHOOQ is simply she has a hot rear end, and that's where the Banksy is basically the translation of the Duchamp. So it's kind of a funny thing there of all of that. And if you're kind of curious, we can discuss why Duchamp would write that she has a hot rear end and Banksy is showing that. So I should have warned a little bit of a PG-13 rating for the class, but there you go. Hey, it's not funny, it's art. So getting into form and content. So form, you know, what am I looking at? What is this physical object? You know, the form of the piece. What's going on there? And with that, you know, the media that was used, you know, the style, composition, that kind of goes hand in hand with you know the different things, the different movements, their image making, and all that we just kind of looked a lot of. So the form, David Bates Oyster Bar, 1984. So basically, it's oil on canvas. Oftentimes, style David Bates is put in with the new image painters that gained a lot of notoriety in the very tail end, late 70s, early 80s. And so, you know, just kind of a, I don't know, basic human form imagery in the painting. So that would be the form, you know, looking at the media, oil on canvas, the style, new image painters, and just sort of the style and composition, you know, the way the different groups handle the elements and the principles, things like that. So those two sort of go hand in hand in a way. Uh, so content, what is going on? What am I supposed to get from this painting? What is it telling me? What is the story behind this? You know, everything kind of has to have some type of story, right? You know, even the Rebecca Purdom, even though her painting is about nothing, there is an explanation on how you get the nothing. So the David Bates painting here, a little bit about David Bates. He's a homegrown artist from Texas, and a lot of his work deals with the Gulf Coast region and livelihood. So this simply, you know, as far as like some type of message or subject matter, uh, this could just simply be the, you know, oyster bar that they would go to on a Friday nights, and he just was, you know, fascinated with how the waiters could just sit there and, you know, shuck and pop these oysters open, uh, you know, as fast as they could, and, you know, not cutting themselves or injuring themselves. So it could just be, you know, like a childhood memory or one of his favorite restaurants, you know, something along that line. You know, for David Bates' work, it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot going on. And then iconography. Is there any iconography? Is there some type of symbolism within this painting that has a deeper meaning? Um, for the David Bates, no, there is no deeper meaning to it. It's pretty simple and straightforward. You know, iconography is not always used, but we'll get into that in a minute. Uh, so here's you know, oyster bar, pretty simple, like I said. So the Barbara Kruger, you know, we don't need another hero, you know, done in 1987. So again, this is pretty much a product of its time. You know, what was going on in the 80s? Why don't we need another hero? What's wrong with heroes? Well, I mean, kind of looking at the image, and Barbara Kruger often liked to pull images from magazines and ads from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Kind of rework the image a little bit to her likings and add some type of text. So in this case, we don't need another hero. Um, So the 80s, that becomes kind of the big thing because you know, that was when we have you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, all these macho men people. So Barbara Kruger coming along, you know, we don't need another macho male type. You know, a lot of her work is dealing with gender issues and you know, the way there's you know the gender inequality, you know, why they're not female heroes. Where's the Scarlett Johansson or the Angelina Jolie? You know, the female actresses are like kind of the you know They're like the action heroes. Where are they? Why don't we have them? We don't need any more of these male stereotypes anymore. We're sick of that. We need the stronger female. We don't need another hero, basically. And so iconography. So symbolism within the paintings where we talked about shapes as icons, the Christian cross, Star of David, yin and yang. So that would sort of, fall under iconography. Artists using specific things in paintings to help the viewer along, to help give deeper meaning to things. So looking at the Bronzino, Venus, Cupid, Folly, Time, the exposure of luxury. How do we know this cast of characters in this painting? Who is Cupid? How do we know who Cupid is? Well, Cupid has the wings there. He has the quiver and the bow. Venus, Venus is kind of easy. Goddess of love, goddess of beauty. Folly, probably not too familiar with him, but Folly's there on the right holding the little like handfuls of roses. Folly wants the party to start. So it's sort of, they're all sort of allegories. This sort of, Folly is an allegory of, the party, the happiness, the great times. Same with Time, up there, Father Time. It's kind of hard to see, but on his shoulder you can see an hourglass, and often that's kind of going along sort of a more mature gentleman, holding an hourglass or having like some type of staff or something with an hourglass. So, by understanding iconography, you can kind of work your way through the cast of characters in this painting. So, but what about when you don't know what's going on? When you're given an image that it's totally foreign to you. So here's two images from the 13th century. On the right, we have the Cimabue, Madonna enthroned. So those of us with a Christian background, or just sort of a working knowledge of Christianity, imagery, things like that. Knowing Madonna, Mary, Virgin Mary, Mother of Jesus. I think as a Western culture, we're a little sort of familiar with that, whatever your upbringing, whatever your background may be. And then the piece from Tibet, what's going on there? Basically, it's an image of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattvas were they came from Buddhism, and they are typically used as they've decided not to reach nirvana so that they can help people. So they're kind of like a saint, if you're familiar with the ideas of a saint. So they are, with saints within Buddhism. So it's, Tibet. So they have, their own spin, their own take on Buddhism, what Buddha would look like, what Bodhisattvas would look like, and all of that. So comparing the two, they're remarkably very similar to each other. If you think back at the hierarchical scale, bigger's better, front and center. Well, looking at these two, who's front and center? The important person. They're also bigger than everyone else. So the Cimabue, on the right, even if you're not necessarily that familiar with Christian iconography, because she's bigger in the center and everyone, most everyone's kind of looking or nodding, tilting their head towards her. Obviously, she's an important person. Same with on the left. This guy's big, front, center. Kind of smaller people going around him. Uh, it's very important in the middle, kind of lesser as we go around, work our way out of it. Then down towards the bottom, on each one, it's sort of, that would have been, the minor cast of characters. So understanding sort of basic use of iconography, you're able to sort of, work your way through these two images, done at the same time, basically. Worlds apart, cultures apart, just completely separated by everything. But yet they're remarkably similar in the way that they are done. So that wraps up all of the first part with the themes, theories, elements, and principles, and all of that. And the next that we will look into are the studio disciplines.